how do you even start to make sense of a conflict that has just so many layers, so many different voices, and, well, an immediate life-altering impact on literally millions of people? It can feel pretty overwhelming, right? Today on the deep dive, our mission is to try and pull back the curtain a bit on the recent developments and also the really deep divisions shaping the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. We're drawing directly from a whole range of critical sources, news reports, expert analyses, perspectives from people on the ground, basically, to give you a shortcut to understanding what might be going on beneath the headlines.
That's right. And the information we've looked at, it really reflects a pivotal moment. Think of it as a snapshot from mid-August 2025. There have been recent decisions, statements by key figures that have these huge internal and international ramifications. We'll explore how these are shaping, the humanitarian crisis, the political strategies, and really the fabric of Israeli society itself.
Okay, let's unpack this then. I think we have to start with the immediate, very pressing humanitarian crisis in Gaza. The numbers are, frankly, heartbreaking. They paint a picture of just immense suffering. Our sources highlight that on August 15th alone, 16 Palestinians were killed. And shockingly, that number includes 5 people here just seeking aid.
Yeah, and over a single 24-hour period around then, sources reported a staggering 123 people killed in Gaza City.
It's just hard to grasp.
And what's particularly striking here is the sheer scale of the suffering, especially when you look at food security. The UN World Food Program, they didn't mince words. They called the situation catastrophic.
Catastrophic.
Yeah. Their report stated that at least 40,000 children under the age of 1 are suffering from malnutrition. And the Gaza Health Ministry reported that as of August 14th, 239 Palestinians, and that includes 106 children, had tragically starved to death. This isn't just, numbers on a page. It's a fundamental collapse of basic human needs.
And adding to this incredibly dire picture are these accusations of aid obstruction. Beyond the death toll, what are the sources telling us about the challenges getting aid in? We're hearing some pretty alarming things, aren't we?
Absolutely. You've got more than 100 humanitarian organizations calling on Israel to end what they're calling the weaponization of aid. Vital relief, according to these reports, is simply stranded.
Stranded.
Yeah. For instance, UNRWA, that's the main UN agency for Palestinian refugees, they reported being barred from delivering aid for over 5 months. 5 months. That amounts to roughly 6,000 truckloads of essential supplies just stuck.
6,000 truckloads.
So this isn't just some logistical hiccup. Our sources suggest a deeply concerning pattern where aid, which is a lifeline, right, is allegedly being used as a tool. It raises really profound questions about basic humanitarian principles.
And, if that wasn't enough, think about the other challenges just piling on. We're seeing reports of Israeli quadcopters dropping leaflets for forced evacuation in Gaza City's Zaytun neighborhood. This affects thousands of people right after heavy strikes and, 350 home demolitions?
That's right. And on top of that, there's a severe heat wave that's turned these makeshift shelters into, the reports say, ons. Plus critical shortages of water, no electricity, no fans. It paints a truly, truly dire picture.
So you have this humanitarian catastrophe unfolding, obviously drawing international attention and concern. How has the Israeli leadership, specifically Prime Minister Netanyahu, responded to these reports, especially about starvation?
Well, in response to those specific reports of starvation, Netanyahu condemned them quite strongly as lies. He claimed pretty directly that the only ones that are being starved in Gaza are our hostages.
That's a stark statement.
It is, and it brings us to this really crucial point about accountability. According to Luciano Zaccara, he's a political analyst at Qatar University, his perspective is that Israel has faced basically no accountability despite these incredibly high casualty figures and the humanitarian crisis. He articulated that international law, in this context, has essentially failed to save lives. It suggests this deep frustration, with the global system's inability to intervene effectively, a real disconnect between the reality on the ground and any sense of accountability.
Okay, so here's where it gets, I think, really interesting as we shift from the immediate crisis to the bigger strategic calculations. Let's delve into Prime Minister Netanyahu's stated strategy for, ending the war and repairing Israel's image. His calculation, as reported, seems pretty straightforward. Win the war quickly and the rest will sort itself out. It's a bold stance, but what does sort itself out actually mean here?
Well, when you look closer at that strategy, you uncover some highly controversial discussions about potentially resettling displaced Palestinians. Our sources detail reported talks, exploratory talks maybe, with countries like South Sudan, Somaliland, Ethiopia, Libya, and Indonesia.
Resettling them outside of Gaza.
That seems to be the idea floated. These countries were allegedly looking for significant financial and international compensation in return. But, and this is crucial, South Sudan and Somaliland publicly rejected these reports as baseless.
Mm-hmm.
And Indonesia, they only offered medical treatment with a very clear condition that patients would return to Gaza once recovered. So it's hardly a done deal or universally accepted plan.
And Netanyahu himself, defending this idea, stated it wasn't pushing out Palestinians, but rather allowing them to leave. He even urged other countries, saying, open your doors if you really care about Palestinians and want to help. It's quite a framing.
It really is. And this kind of leads us to an even grander and arguably more contentious vision that seems to be emerging from the Prime Minister himself.
Yeah.
This concept of Greater Israel.
Greater Israel. What exactly does that mean in this context?
Well, when asked directly if he connected to this vision, Netanyahu's response, according to reports, was very much. Now, Greater Israel typically refers to a state beyond Israel's current recognized borders, often drawing on biblical interpretations of the land of Israel. This could potentially include parts of today's Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon.
Wow, okay. That's ambitious.
It is. And our sources indicate this vision is seen as, quote, deeply rooted in Likud Netanyahu's party and broader Zionist ideology. It's important context because some observers see Israel as having encroached on Palestinian land for decades and now potentially eyeing Gaza and even, quote, additional land beyond the Palestinian territories.
Unsurprisingly, this Greater Israel talk sparked immediate and strong international backlash.
Oh, absolutely. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, they condemned the term as provocative, destabilizing, infringing on sovereignty. The UAE called it a blatant violation of international law. The very mention sends ripples, maybe even shockwaves across the region.
Yeah, you can see why. It touches on really core issues of borders, sovereignty, the whole future shape of the Middle East.
Exactly. This isn't just rhetoric. It's about a vision that, if actually pursued, would fundamentally reshape the geopolitical map.
So while all this is happening, the crisis in Gaza, the strategic talk about resettlement and Greater Israel, our sources show this parallel, equally impactful battle intensifying in the occupied West Bank, specifically around new settlement construction. Let's shift focus there. We saw a pretty significant announcement from the far-right finance minister, Bezalel Smotrich. He stated his intention to approve construction of more than 3,000 homes in the E1 area.
Right, E1. And this raises the question, why is E1 so critical? Why does this specific plan get so much attention? Well, it's located really strategically between Jerusalem and the large settlement of Ma'ale Adumim, and crucially, plans for E1 have been frozen for decades, largely due to intense international opposition.
Why the opposition?
Because if it's built, it would, according to critics and analysts, effectively cut off the West Bank from occupied East Jerusalem. Smotrich himself didn't shy away from this. He was quoted saying it would bury the idea of a Palestinian state because there was nothing to recognize and no one to recognize. So this isn't just about housing units. It's seen as fundamentally altering the territorial basis for any future two-state solution.
And just to underline the point, the international consensus, legally speaking, is that settlements like these are illegal under international law. The International Court of Justice even reinforced this in an advisory opinion last year, so the implications here are legal as well as political.
Precisely. And the international condemnation for this E1 plan was swift as widespread, exactly because of those implications. The UN stated it would put an end to prospects of a two-state solution, full stop.
Pretty definitive.
Yeah. The EU called it a breach of international law. The UK said it strongly opposes it as a flagrant breach. Germany strongly rejects the plan. You see this unified message. This specific expansion is viewed internationally as potentially a fatal blow to that particular peace framework.
And it wasn't just international condemnation, right? There was internal Israeli dissent, too.
Yes, notably from the NGO piece now. They stated the Netanyahu government is exploiting every minute to deepen the annexation of the West Bank and prevent the possibility of a two-state solution. They didn't pull any punches, calling it condemning us to continued bloodshed. A stark warning from within Israeli civil society.
And the Palestinian reaction.
As you'd expect, very strong. The Palestinian Foreign Ministry labeled it an extension of crimes of genocide, displacement, and annexation.
Yeah.
Just highlights these vastly different, completely opposing interpretations of the very same actions. One side sees security, maybe development. The other sees deliberate dispossession.
So bringing all these threads together, what does it all mean for Israel itself? Despite Prime Minister Netanyahu's rhetoric about being more united than ever because of the conflict, the reality presented in our sources is quite different. It suggests Israel is maybe as divided now as at any time in its history. That's a deep irony, isn't it?
It truly is. And this is where you really see the chasms, not just fault lines, but deep chasms within Israeli society.
Hmm.
Let's look at some specific examples from the sources that illustrate these divides. Take public opinion on suffering in Gaza. An Israeli Democracy Institute poll from late July 2025, so quite recent, found that 78% of Jewish Israelis believe the IDF makes substantial efforts to avoid causing unnecessary suffering.
Okay.
And 79% of Jewish Israelis were reportedly not troubled by reports of famine or suffering in Gaza. But in stark contrast, 86% of Israel's Palestinian Arab minority were troubled by those same reports.
Wow, that's a massive gap in perception.
It's huge. And this divergence, it isn't just abstract opinion. It profoundly shapes how events are even reported and understood within Israel.
Yeah, that difference really hits home with an anecdote from one journalist, doesn't it? We heard from Israeli journalist Emmanuel Elbas Phelps. She tried to raise the issue of Palestinian deaths on a popular TV show, and the host basically told her, I do not have to worry about the people in Gaza. They are my enemies.
Right. And Elbas Phelps's view is that this is a symptom of Israeli media generally not showing the human stories from Gaza. Why? Because Israelis are collectively, in what she called the trauma time, stemming from the October 7th attacks, still deeply consumed by the fate of the hostages. It points to this very real psychological barrier to empathy across the divide.
And that trauma, that focus on the hostages, it plays into public opinion in complex ways.
Absolutely. Because you still have around 20 Israeli hostages believed to be alive in Gaza. It's a constant, painful issue. Pollster Dalia Shineland notes that while a majority of Israelis actually support ending the war to get the hostages back.
They do. Okay.
Yes, according to her polling. But at the same time, many also believe the reports of suffering in Gaza are exaggerated or maybe even fabricated. This is partly attributed to what's called Hasbara, Israel's public diplomacy or PR efforts aimed at shaping narratives. Shineland suggests it influences how Israelis process information, sometimes leading them to dismiss uncomfortable truths because, as she put it, it's too hard for them to cope with.
But within this complex picture, there's also this powerful and very vocal ultranationalist right wing. What do our sources tell us about their perspective and influence?
They represent a really significant force, especially within the government coalition. You have West Bank settlers, like Aaron Katzoff mentioned in one source, who view the war not just as justified, but as a miracle period, fulfilling prophecies.
A miracle period.
Yeah, that kind of ideological fervor is mirrored by the ultranationalist coalition partners, Finance Minister Smotrich, who we already discussed.
Right, with the E1 plan.
Exactly. And National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir. These aren't minor players. They hold considerable political leverage. They're threatening to bring down the government if any ceasefire deal is made that doesn't meet their maximalist demands. And those demands include things like annexing Gaza, removing Palestinians, they often use terms like voluntary emigration, and replacing them with Jewish settlers.
And Ben-Gvir has been particularly provocative.
Extremely. He made a highly publicized provocative visit to taunt the jailed Fatah leader Marwan Barghouti. Hamas and Palestinian officials obviously condemn that. He's also led prayers at the Temple Mount, a very sensitive site, and openly called to conquer the whole of Gaza Strip and, again, encourage voluntary emigration. These are key ministers pushing very clear, very radical vision.
And this ultranationalist pressure, it must create tensions even within the Israeli establishment itself.
It certainly seems to. There's notable friction reported between the political leadership and the IDF, the military. The chief of staff, General Eyal Zamir, is reportedly opposing a new major offensive. Why? Because of the risk it poses to the remaining hostages and the potential to worsen the already catastrophic humanitarian crisis. Media speculation even suggests he's been marked for dismissal for challenging Netanyahu's plans. This internal disagreement really speaks volumes about the different priorities and, frankly, the pressures within Israel's own power structures.
Sure. Okay, so you have that pressure from the right, but then on the other side of the spectrum, you have a secular opposition who are very critical of the current direction.
That's right. Figures like Avram Berg, a former politician, describe Israel in stark terms. Fragmented, broken, torn apart, caught between religious excitement and psychological despair.
And what are they demanding? What are these protests about?
They're staging significant protests, and the main calls are for Netanyahu's resignation, the return of all hostages, and an end to the war. They tend to view the ongoing conflict as serving primarily Netanyahu's own political survival, rather than the country's actual interests.
And how do they respond to the argument that stopping the war means letting Hamas win?
They dismiss that as propaganda. Their view, as articulated by one organizer, is that the army can protect Israel's borders without occupying Gaza permanently. Unless, this organizer added, the real goal is actually to conquer Gaza and to transfer the people of Gaza.
Mm.
This organized dissent really highlights that deep fracture within the Israeli public, this feeling that the nation is being torn from inside.
So this deep dive has really uncovered this incredibly intricate web, hasn't it? From the immediate catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza and the intense international pressure building around it, to the strategic gambles about population displacement, territorial expansion like E1, the whole greater Israel concept, and ultimately these deeply held, often completely conflicting beliefs and visions that are shaping Israel's path forward from within.
It's become very clear these aren't just political debates or simple policy disagreements anymore. They really represent vastly different visions for the future of Israel, the future of the region, and each path carries just immense human stakes. The information shows a society grappling with these profound internal fault lines right alongside these long-standing external conflicts.
So it leaves you thinking. In a region where history and faith and sheer survival are so intricately woven together, what actually becomes possible? What happens when the internal fault lines seem to run just as deep, maybe even deeper, than the external conflicts themselves? It's a question that, our sources suggest, Israel is grappling with very intensely every single day.